Now let's go to Scott Wright, the president of DraftCountdown.com, as we are just hours away from the NFL draft, and the silly season is behind us. Now it's the really wacky season, Scott. What's going on, man?
Not much. The big day is finally here. Happy draft day.
Ooh, yes. We're finally here, and obviously you're going to start hearing all sorts of crazy stuff as we get ready for this. Your final mock draft is posted now at DraftCountdown.com. So let's take a look and get your thoughts on this. Joe Burrow, apparently the Bengals have kind of shot everybody down. That's going to be the pick number one. Do you see any craziness happening at pick one?
I do not. The only scenario where something crazy could have happened is if the Bengals, A, got a huge offer that they couldn't turn down from a team like the Miami Dolphins, and B, they would have needed to really fall in love with Justin Herbert, the quarterback from Oregon, coaching him down at the Senior Bowl. Doesn't sound like either one or both of those things happened, so they're taking Burrow number one, and I think that's the right decision.
All right. Everybody seems to have Chase Young at number two. We have heard little murmurs about Rivera liking Tua, or Rivera possibly liking a quarterback because, Haskins was given to him. It's not really his quarterback, but is Young the guy that's going to go number two?
He is. The only alternative would be if somebody just paid through the absolute roof. But, the Redskins love Chase Young. Ron Rivera is a defensive-minded guy. He understands the value of an elite pass rusher and a generational talent at a premium position like Young. So it's about as close as to a no-brainer as you get. And even though Joe Burrow is going to be the number one pick, I think the vast majority of draft boards around the league have Chase Young as the number one overall pick, or as the number one overall player in this draft. So I feel good. I'm going to get two right in the mock draft. I think we can write 1 and 2 down in ink. After that, all bets are off.
All right, let's take a look at that number 3 spot. Now, you have Jeff Okudah, the corner from Ohio State, going to Detroit. What's more likely, that they take him or they do not pick in this spot?
I think it's more likely they take him just because I don't know that there's an offer there. There certainly isn't an offer that you'd expect at the top of the draft where multiple first-round picks are exchanging hands. I think they could get some nominal return from the Dolphins or Chargers to move down 2 or 3 spots, which is fine because they'll probably get the same play at 5 or 6 as they would at 3. So even if you get a third-round pick, it's still worthwhile. But it really comes down to whether there's a trade there. I think is going to be whether the Lions have reasonable expectations for their trade demands. But I wouldn't be shocked if they stood there and took Okudah, and he gets the nod over Derrick Brown from Auburn because even with Darius Slay last year, who's now an Eagle, the Lions had the worst pass defense in the league. So that gives Okudah the nod over Brown.
Scott Wright, Draft Countdown, looking at his final mock draft, getting you ready for it tonight. The Giants are next, and the Giants could be all over the place. They got their quarterback, we think. They got their running back definitively. They're in the 4 spot here because they haven't been very good. One of the reasons they're not very good, they can't block. So do they stay here, take the best lineman available? Tristan Wires is who you have from Iowa. Do they stay there and go there, take a lineman, or do they get out of this spot?
I think they stay there. It's not in their general manager Dave Gettleman's MO to trade down. I'm sure he's fallen in love with somebody by this point. And a case can be made for Isaiah Simmons, the linebacker from Clemson, from a need and value perspective, but it's just not like the Giants organization to go that route. They're going to stay true, I think, to their nature, both the organization, the GM, and build in the trenches and bring in that physical freak. And I think Tristan Wirfs gets the edge over Jedrick Wills from Alabama, and watch out for Andrew Thomas from Georgia, too. He doesn't have a lot of buzz, but I think he's going to go earlier than people expect, and he could even be the first blocker off the board. But I went with Wirfs there, and not only is that the right move, but it also helps support the investments they made in Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. So an offensive tackle just makes the most sense for the Giants.
All right. Now, Miami, they've been all over the place, trading up, getting out, tanking for Tua. Well, they didn't really tank all the way. They won too many games, but here they are at 5, and you think it's going to work out for them and that Tua is their guy. We've heard some reports lately of Justin Herbert, but you think Tua at number 5?
I went with Tua in the final mock draft just because I figure, let's not overthink it. He's the guy that they were, quote unquote, tanking for all along. And, all the focus with Tua in the recent months has been on the injury and the worst case scenario. What if he gets hurt? What if he's a bust? What if you take him and he's a bust? Well, I would argue there's another side to that coin. What if you pass on him and he ends up going somewhere else and becomes a superstar? That's the type of thing that will haunt an organization for decades. And, the Dolphins have experience with that. They were going to sign Drew Brees as a free agent until their doctors wouldn't pass him on the physical, and he winds up going to the Saints, and the rest is history. So no team understands that part of the risk better than the Dolphins. So I think they take Tua, but they've been linked to Justin Herbert from Oregon going back to even a year ago when they thought he might come out early. So I think he's a distinct possibility, too, if they have any reservations at all about Tua's durability. And then I've even heard them linked to Jordan Love. I mean, there's scenarios where maybe they address another position with that first pick, and then they're picking at 18 again. They have a bunch of other draft picks they can maneuver around, and maybe they go with an offensive lineman with that first pick and then maneuver to get Jordan Love from Utah State, who I've heard they like as well. So, I mean, like football in general, the NFL draft kind of revolves around the quarterbacks, and it's kind of tough to figure out exactly where they're going to go. I think 3 of the 4 are going to go in the top 6 overall, but at least one of them is probably going to slide. All
right, the Chargers, you have Justin Herbert going there. I mean, obviously, Tyrod Taylor and their coaches really, Anthony Lynn, has tried his best to come out and say that Tyrod is not only the quarterback, he's the long-term guy there, but is anybody buying that?
Yeah, I keep trying to convince people of that. We'll see how far it gets you. I mean, I have a feeling that tune's going to be changing probably after tonight. And I have heard there's a chance they might not take a quarterback with that top pick. You can make an argument for a left tackle they desperately need. So that would be the alternative. And if they did that, they would target, from what I've heard, Jalen Hurts from Oklahoma on day 2. So it's something to watch out for, but I think they'd be remiss not to take the quarterback at number 6. Justin Herbert from Oregon would be a fine option, as would Jordan Love from Utah State. Whoever it is will be an upgrade over their current situation, but I have to think the apple of their eye is Tua Tagovailoa. They need to activate a lackadaisical fan base. They need to sell tickets for their fancy new stadium. They need to sell jerseys, and Tua's the guy who has that star power who would do all that. So I think that's the perfect match for not only the Chargers, but I think that would be a good fit for Tua as well to play out there on the West Coast. So we'll see if the Chargers can find a way to get Tua, because I think that would be a perfect match.
Scott Wright, DraftCountdown.com, looking through his final mock draft here, the draft tonight, of course. Derrick Brown, you have the Auburn defensive tackle heading to Carolina. You know, Matt Rule is in there now, so they have a new coach who's coming from the college game. But interesting, Derrick Brown, defensive tackle there. They brought in a new quarterback with Teddy Bridgewater. They don't have the most flashy options in that offense for him, but you think defense is the way they go?
I definitely think they're going defense. It's kind of a coin flip between Derrick Brown, who you mentioned, and Isaiah Simmons, linebacker from Clemson, if he's there. From need and value perspective, both make sense. Ultimately, I went with the defensive linemen just because they've been ravaged by losses this offseason. They lost 3 of their top defensive linemen, so the coverage really bare. And Derrick Brown is just a heck of a player. But the Panthers are tough to get a read on because their new head coach, Matt Rule, let's face it, they have a general manager, but Matt Rule has a 7-year contract. He's going to be calling the shots there and making these decisions ultimately. We don't have an MO on him yet. We don't know what his preferences are, what traits he's going to value. So I'm interested to get a little more info. We went like this last year, too, with Mike Mayock as the general manager of the Raiders, and we found out that he really covets intangibles. He likes high-character guys, hard workers, team captains. We'll see what Matt Rule's looking for. All
right. That's an interesting name to watch out there. Derrick Brown, the defensive tackle from Auburn, going to Carolina at number 7. Arizona, very wild card-esque, right? I mean, you have Isaiah Simmons, wide receiver, I guess, was going to be in play. Then they made that trade, but, they could still possibly be a trade target for somebody else trying to get into this spot. I find that Arizona is going to be a very interesting play tonight.
Yeah, they're definitely one of those pressure points in that top 10 overall because they could do a few things. Everyone kind of assumes that they're going to take a blocker, which makes perfect sense. It only makes sense to support Kenneth Murray, and nobody gave up more sacks last year than the Cardinals, so best available blocker. But if Isaiah Simmons is there, the Cardinals had so much trouble last year stopping tight ends. I mean, it was borderline ridiculous, and Isaiah Simmons would solve that problem in a quick hurry. He is the cure to just about any matchup nightmare a defense has. So I think if Isaiah Simmons is there, he would make a whole lot of sense. Otherwise, I think it'll probably be a blocker. But maybe Derrick Brown, the defensive tackle from Auburn, if he's there, he could make some sense as well. So I think it's probably going to be Simmons or a blocker, but with Derrick Brown is kind of a dark horse.
Now, Jacksonville I find to be very interesting because of the fact that, Yannick Ngakoue definitely wants out. Do they use him to try to, or does somebody swoop in and try to get him tonight? They have the 9th pick here. You have C.J. Henderson, who's been flying up draft boards as well. When this process started, he was back in that 20 range. Now he's going somewhere in the top 10 for a lot of people here. But Jacksonville's another team that is really hard to get a read on.
They really are, and throughout this process, as I've been doing mock drafts for the last 4 or 5 months, I think Jacksonville is the team I've consistently had the most difficulty projecting, partly because they have so many needs, and now with 2 and maybe 3 first-round picks if they end up trading Young and Ngakoue, they're going to have a lot of options with the way they want to utilize them. And you mentioned Ngakoue maybe getting traded. There's rumors out there that maybe the Raiders are close to a deal, and they've offered that 19th overall pick for him, so we'll see. But the Jaguars are going to have a lot of needs. They're going to have these 3 first-round picks, but they gave up their franchise shutdown corner. They're giving up their franchise pass rusher. They got a lot of holes they're going to have to plug. I went with C.J. Henderson, the cornerback from Florida, in the final mock draft because it addresses a hole. But I wouldn't be at all surprised to see them maybe trade down, and they could go with Henderson. They could go with one of those defensive tackles, and Brown and Kinlaw I mentioned. They could go with Isaiah Simmons if he's there. They're going to need a pass rusher if they traded Ngakoue. I've heard them linked to a wide receiver. So I think the Jaguars is as big of a wild card as you'll see. But as I mentioned, I went with C.J. Henderson, and I think he's a guy we're going to see teams jockeying to get because he's the clear-cut number 2 corner in this draft, and there's a definitive drop-off after him to that next tier. So if you need a corner, and there's lots of teams that do, I mentioned the Jaguars, the Raiders really need a corner. So I think we could see a team trade up to get C.J. Henderson. In fact, of all the guys in this draft that I'm most confident somebody's going to trade up to get, it would probably be Henderson. Not only because of his talent, but because of his unique situation revolving around his position. So keep an eye on C.J. Henderson. I think he goes somewhere back end of that top 10, worst case probably early teens. That's the guy the teams are going to trade up for. And that's where we're going to see the action in this draft. Not necessarily in the top 5. I think we might see one trade with somebody going up for a quarterback in the top 5, but back into the top 10, just outside the top 10. I think you're going to see teams come up for not only Henderson, but also one of those offensive tackles and one of the top wide receivers. That's where there's going to be a run on the blockers and pass catchers. So if you like trades, that's where you're going to see the action tonight, I think.
He's Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. I think about one of the more consistent mock draft picks is Andrew Thomas going to Cleveland at number 10. I mean, they certainly need help on that offensive line.
Yeah, it makes sense. We know they need a blocker. They need a left tackle. It's just a matter of which one. And Andrew Thomas might not even make it till 10, but if he's there, he makes a lot of sense. He's the surest left tackle of the top 4 blockers in this class. And also, he grades out really well for the analytics folks, and that's something the Cleveland Browns kind of are putting a reliance on. So makes sense, but the Browns could trade down too. I've actually heard they really like Ezra Cleveland, the offensive tackle from Boise State as well. So there again, if somebody wants to come up, I think Cleveland might be content to drop down into the latter part of the teams and maybe take Cleveland if a team like the Miami Dolphins wants to jump back up and get a blocker or someone else, or the Buccaneers at 14 who are kind of sitting there desperately need a blocker to protect Tom Brady, but I don't know if one of those top 4 is going to get to them at 14, so they're another team that might want to explore trading up. So I think all these teams are talking about, the Cardinals, going back to the Panthers, the Cardinals, the Jaguars, the Browns, they've all been talked about as possibilities to trade down.
All right, the Jets are interesting because lately here, Joe Douglas, of course, was with the Eagles, and then out of nowhere, you're starting to hear, hey, Joe Douglas picked Andre Dillard. I mean, that was kind of not he picked him, but it was his, recommendation, and you wonder if an Andre Dillard move here with the Jets at 12, is this a spot where if you're Howie Roseman and someone likes Andre Dillard, like possibly your former compadre there, and they like a wide receiver, is that something to keep an eye on in this spot here for the Jets where you have an offensive tackle, Jarek Willis Jr. going?
Possibly. I think, you've heard the Eagles mentioned as maybe a possibility of them trading up for CeeDee Lamb, the wide receiver from Oklahoma, and Philly's been aggressive on draft day. So it wouldn't shock me, but ultimately I think the Jets are in a pretty good position at number 11. They want to support their young quarterback, Sam Darnold, and whether that comes in the form of a blocker or a pass catcher, either would make sense, and they're perfectly positioned there at number 11 to either get one of the top group of offensive tackles or maybe even start the run. They could have their pick of all the wide receivers in this class. So I think that's the dilemma Joe Douglas is facing. And ultimately, I went with the blocker. I just think that he's going to, want to kind of set the tone for what the organization is going to be under his stewardship and kind of focus on the trenches and build with toughness. So I went with the blocker there, but I wouldn't rule out a pass catcher. I wouldn't argue with the pass catcher, but they'll be able to get a wide receiver later on. And in fact, in the second round of my mock draft, I had them getting at 48 overall Jalen Reagor, the wide receiver from TCU, who some people think has a chance to go in the back end of the first round. So if they don't take a wide receiver at 11, they'll be able to get one in the second round. I don't know if I can say the same thing for a stud blocker.
All right. Now, the other day you had mentioned, these receivers, 1A, 1B, 1C. It's just what flavor that you like. You have a run going here. Raiders, Lamb, Judy going to the Niners at number 13. So it seems that if you want to get your receiver, you're going to have to get into that 12 area.
Yeah, if you're targeting them, you know where you want to go, where you got to go. If you're the Eagles, you know you want to get in that top 12 if you want to get CeeDee Lamb. It makes it easy for some of these opposing teams, but I really think there is going to be that run. And I feel good that the CeeDee Lamb is the guy that the Raiders are looking at, although I have heard that John Gruden's kind of infatuated by the pure speed of Henry Ruggs III from Alabama, but I think they go Lamb there. But then the Niners at 13, they could go with either of the Alabama kids, Jerry Jeudy or Henry Ruggs III, and kind of just depends on what Kyle Shanahan wants. Does he opt for the polish and the route running of Jerry Jeudy, or does he opt for just the pure speed and explosiveness of Henry Ruggs? So I think that's the decision the Niners are facing. And, the Niners want to trade down. They have 2 first-round picks at 13 and 31, but then they don't have any second-rounders, any third-rounders, or any fourth-rounders. So they want to rectify that situation. I think they're probably more likely to trade down from 31 out of the first round there to recoup some picks, more so than 13. Just because at 13, they're going to get one of those good receivers, or maybe even a guy like Javon Kinlaw, the defensive tackle from South Carolina, drops into their lap as a replacement for DeForest Buckner. So I think San Francisco is another team that's pretty well suited there at number 13 to get a good fit for both talent and need.
And that's a great spot to be the defending NFC champions, to be at number 13. You can either get another great player or, add some more ammunition. Tampa Bay is interesting all of a sudden because they're obviously going for it now. And Mekhi Becton from Louisville is who you like in that spot for them. Obviously, after the Gronk news the other day, now they're going to look to protect Tom Brady.
Yeah, I mean, they're in win-now mode with Tom Brady now, and it's all about supporting their future Hall of Fame quarterback. And I'm sure they have their fingers crossed that one of those top 4 blockers is still available for them at 14. In this scenario, it was Mekhi Becton from Louisville, who would be a good value. He'd be a plug-and-play starter for them at right tackle. So I think that would be a great pick. If those top 4 offensive tackles are gone, I could see them even reaching a bit for the next guy, which would be Josh Jones from Houston, I hear they like. So don't be shocked if he kind of surprises and sneaks into the top 15 overall if there's a really early run on blockers. So, I mean, I'd like to make an argument for another position for the Buccaneers, but they are just they need a blocker. They need to protect Tom Brady. So if I'm them, I'm working the phones and exploring, maybe moving up 3-4 spots to make sure I get one of those top guys. I think if they come out of this draft without one of those 4 top blockers, it's a failure.
All right, Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. We're whipping through his mock draft here, getting you ready for tonight. You've got Henry Ruggs. You said the other day you thought it was a dream scenario for Philly for him to get there, but Denver just can't pass on him at 15. And I guess if Howie Roseman wants Ruggs, he might have to jump in front of Denver.
Yeah, I don't think Ruggs is getting to 21. I really don't. Speed like that kills. And, you hear comparisons to Tyreek Hill. Who doesn't want a Tyreek Hill? I've heard conflicting reports of which guy the Dolphins prefer between those Alabama receivers, between Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy. And I think either would make sense. Either would be a good compliment to Cortland Sutton there and be a nice weapon for Drew Lock. So I don't think they can go wrong with either. And they're another team I've heard maybe is exploring trading up a little bit, probably to make sure they get the specific guy they want. So they're, again, another team that could jockey around for one of those pass catchers.
All right, let's take a look. Atlanta's another interesting squad here. At number 16, this is a team that has Matt Ryan getting older, Julio Jones getting older, but you think defense is where they need to go with Javon Kinlaw from South Carolina to help out that defense.
I mentioned about how the only 2 things I'm sure of in this draft are the Bengals taking Joe Burrow 1 and the Redskins taking Chase Young number 2. I think the third thing I might be sure of is the Falcons are going to trade up from number 16. Now, who they're going to go get and where they're going to trade up to remains to be seen. I think C.J. Henderson, the cornerback from Florida, makes a lot of sense. I've also heard them linked to those 2 defensive tackles, Derrick Brown from Auburn and Kinlaw, who I had them taken in the mock draft. But, the Falcons are a team that has shown a willingness to be aggressive in the draft to get a player they're targeting. Going back to they traded up for Julio Jones, they traded up for Desmond Trufant, and the last couple of weeks, there's just been rampant rumors that the Falcons are trying to be aggressive and move up. So ultimately, I think they get the job done. I think they get into that back end of the top 10, just outside of it, and they get, like I said, probably a defender, best available defender, whether it's that cover guy who I think is a favorite or one of those defensive tackles. But if I'm a betting person, I feel really confident the Falcons are going to move up.
All right. I like Dallas here. Let's see what you think with Dallas is, they're a team that obviously has a lot of their core still together, but they did lose a couple of defensive pieces over this offseason here. So you like a outside linebacker going to Dallas to help out that defense.
Yeah, and their dream scenario would be to get C.J. Henderson, the cornerback from Florida. That's their most glaring need, but he's almost assuredly going to be off the board by 17. And the next cover guy would probably be a little bit of a reach, whether it's A.J. Terrell from Clemson or someone else. So I'm taking a pass rusher. They lost Robert Quinn in free agency, so they need to replace his production. And they have some options. You hear about Randy Gregory and Alden Smith, but far more questions than answers. So K'Lavon Chase is the second best edge pass rusher in this draft after Chase Young. So to get him at 17, pretty good value. So I think that would make a lot of sense for the Cowboys. And as a dark horse, watch out for Cesar Ruiz, the center from Michigan, who could be a replacement for Travis Frederick, who retired. But Dallas, they're in a kind of a tough position because Henderson's going to be gone. I'm not sure if Chaseon's going to be there. If both Chaseon and Henderson are gone, I wouldn't be shocked to see Dallas maneuver down a little bit.
Okay, Miami, you have 18, Josh Jones, a tackle. I want to go to 19, the Raiders, Kenneth Murray, linebacker, because we've heard that name around the Eagles a lot, but you don't even think he's going to get there.
He might. This is probably the high end for Kenneth Murray, and I talked about how last year Mike Mayock showed he values those intangibles and the leadership and the locker room guys, and Kenneth Murray fits that description as well as any prospect in this class. The teams just rave about how well he interviewed, so I think that would make sense. But the Raiders could go in a lot of different directions. They're another team that desperately needs a cover guy. We kind of assume they're just going to take a wide receiver at number 12, but I wouldn't be shocked if they took C.J. Henderson, the cornerback from Florida there. They need a cornerback as much as they need a pass catcher. But then I've heard everything from cornerback, wide receiver, in the mix for the Raiders at 19 to linebacker to even a quarterback. If Tua or Justin Herbert or Jordan Love starts to fall, maybe the Raiders could be a spot to stop that slide. So the Raiders, I think, have a lot. And then I mentioned, too, about how maybe they trade one of those picks for Yannick Ngakoue. So the Raiders have a lot of options, and I think they showed last year that they're a little bit unpredictable on draft day. But, I don't know if I have a high degree of difficulty or a high degree of confidence there about what the Raiders are going to do at 19. But I would guess, though, that assuming they get a wide receiver first, they'll be looking defense with that next choice.
Then you're back at Jacksonville. Again, we talked about them. You've got them going with Cleveland, the offensive tackle from Boise State, which leaves us to Philadelphia at 21, where I feel like there's so many scenarios for them. They can move up for one of those wideouts. They can move out here and stock up multiple wideouts, as you suggested on Tuesday's show. But for this purpose, you've got him taking Justin Jefferson, which I guess to some would be a surprise if he gets to this spot, but you like him falling there.
I continue to hear the Eagles love Justin Jefferson. It certainly addresses a need that's right about where he's supposed to go. So the stars seem to align. And, going back again, everyone's going to have those same top two picks, but the third most consensus, I think, for everybody that's doing mock drafts, it might end up being Justin Jefferson going to the Eagles at 21. It just makes so much sense for it almost not to happen. And there's scenarios where he goes off the board a little earlier. If there's an earlier run on pass catchers, maybe the Broncos take him at 15. I've heard the Raiders really like him. I've even heard the Raiders could take two receivers with that 12 and 19th pick. I don't see that happening, but it's something to keep an eye on. But I think there's a good chance that Justin Jefferson will be there for the Eagles, and if he is, I'd be shocked if they didn't pull the trigger.
And that's going to be interesting. Like if Justin Jefferson's there and Murray's there, then what do they do? If Ruggs is there and Murray's there, what do they do? If four receivers are gone, do they just get out of that spot and wait until tomorrow to get the wide receiver? I mean, there's so many. I feel like Howie Roseman at 21 is a very big intrigue in this particular. A lot of times teams in the 20 aren't all that interesting sometimes, but they seem to be a pretty interesting spot there. You do have Jordan Love, another quarterback going to New Orleans, obviously, with Drew Brees, getting older and then losing Bridgewater there. And then I find another interesting spot when you go all the way to the end of this draft, Denzel Mims, number 30. I mean, he's got another wide receiver going in the first round.
Well, Denzel Mims has been the darling of this pre-draft process. He crushed it at the Senior Bowl and Scouting Combine, and I've even heard him mentioned as early as the top 20 overall. I've heard him mentioned linked to the Broncos at 15, the Raiders at 19, and then a number of teams in the early 20s. The Vikings at 22 would be a possibility. I think the Saints, the Packers. So I think Denzel Mims is probably going to end up being a first-round pick here. It might just be a matter of how early. And then Jordan Love, like you said, I have him going to the Saints at 24. It's just really difficult to find a fit for him. I'm confident he's going to go in the first round, but it might be a case where somebody trades up for him. And he's going to go in tonight thinking there's at least a chance I could go as early as 5 or 6 overall, and he could still be available in the 20s. This could be an Aaron Rodgers, Brady Quinn type of situation tonight for Jordan Love. But the Saints would be an outstanding fit for him. He could sit and learn for at least a year or two, which he desperately needs because he's still rough around the edges. And Drew Brees is literally so close to retirement that he's already signed a broadcast contract.
Yeah.
So, it's coming. It's not, not even like a couple years ago where you start thinking, well, maybe we should prepare. It's coming. It's barreling down the tracks at you. And even a couple years ago in the 2017 draft, the Saints were poised to take Patrick Mahomes until the Chiefs traded up ahead of them. So Sean Payton's got his eye on the future, and if Love is there, it would make a lot of sense if the Saints are willing to kind of make that short-term sacrifice in using that top pick to bring in guys for the future more so than that guy is going to help them this year and help Drew Brees make one more run.
All right. Before we let you roll, he'll be back tomorrow with 3 to recap round 1 and get us ready for round 2 and 3. Who goes too high tonight?
Well, I'm not as big of a fan of C.J. Henderson, that cornerback from Florida, as a lot of people. I think if he goes in the top 10, that's a little early. And then I think some of these blockers are going to get pushed up. I think that run on the second tier of offensive tackles could start maybe in the back end of the teams. And I talked about how Josh Jones from Houston is going to go a little earlier than I have in my rankings. I think Ezra Cleveland from Boise State is going to go in the top 15 to 20. So I think those blockers are going to get pushed up.
Not high enough. Who should be higher?
Oh, boy. I mean, probably one of the quarterbacks, whichever one of the quarterbacks tends to fall. That definitely stands out. And then I think there's a chance, too, with one of the defensive tackles, whether it's Derrick Brown from Auburn or Javon Kinlaw from South Carolina, slides a little bit, maybe even outside the top 10 overall. And I think both are going to be good values if they're still available at that point. So, but I think the slider tonight's going to be whoever ends up being that fourth quarterback out of that top group of 4.
Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. Check out his full mock draft for some of the teams that we may have missed. Check out all his rankings for tonight. Play along at Draft Countdown on Twitter for tonight, and he'll be back tomorrow to recap round 1 and get us ready for round 2 and 3. Scott, we always appreciate it, pal.
My pleasure. Anytime.
He's back tomorrow right here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.